Tyler Mitchell's first day as a fire lookout at the Great Smoky Mountains was supposed to be uneventful. The towering trees, the wind whispering through the pines, and the occasional chirp of a bird, all the things that should have given him comfort. After all, he'd been assigned here after years of working in other parts of the country. The position was a promotion, and the solitude of the lookout tower was supposed to give him time to recover from the chaos of city life. But something felt different about this place. Tyler had spent the entire drive up, passing through winding roads and dense forest, admiring the scenery, but there was an undercurrent of unease gnawing at him. The dense pines that surrounded him seemed almost oppressive, and the air was thick as if the forest was holding its breath. Even as he unpacked his gear in the small cabin beside the tower, something lingered in the atmosphere, like a feeling of being watched. He brushed it off. He had been on the job for 5 years now, and the first day jitters were nothing new. He tried to remind himself that his new post, like any other, would be just another set of routines. Check the perimeter, look for smoke, report to headquarters, standard protocol. By mid-afternoon, Tyler had completed his first scan. Nothing unusual. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, a patchwork of green, dense and alive. He stepped out of the cabin and adjusted his binoculars, setting his sights on the farthest hills. The view was breathtaking, layers of mist rolling off distant ridges, the sun dipping lower into the sky. For a moment, it almost felt like he had found peace. Then the radio crackled. "Tyler Mitchell, do you copy?" He jumped, his heart racing for a brief moment. The voice on the other end was garbled, the static making it hard to decipher the words. It was his first time receiving an official check-in on this post, and the lack of clarity unsettled him. The signal was weak, but it wasn't the usual crackle of faulty communication. It was different, uneven. "Tyler Mitchell, can you hear us? Please respond." "Yeah, copy," he said, his voice hoarse, trying to adjust the frequency. "This is Tower 3. Go ahead." There was a pause. For a moment he thought the connection had dropped. Then the voice came through again, distorted, sounding almost too calm. "They're out there. Watch the trees. It's not just wind." Tyler blinked, a cold shiver running down his spine. The voice faded out before he could respond. He adjusted the dial on the radio, trying to reach them again, but all he got was static. Whoever it was on the other end had disappeared as quickly as they came. Tyler stood there, staring at the radio. A breeze rustled the trees, but the forest felt different now. The calmness was gone, replaced by a sense of disquiet. He could swear the pines were whispering, their branches swaying in ways that didn't seem natural. Maybe it was just the isolation, he told himself. "It's just the wind," he reassured, forcing his hand to steady as he picked up his binoculars again. But as he scanned the treetops, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The wind, perhaps? The way the branches moved? It wasn't right. It wasn't normal. Tyler quickly turned his attention back to the task at hand, but his mind kept drifting back to the message. Watch the trees. What did that even mean? The radio fell silent for the rest of the day, but the forest didn't. The sounds of movement, faint rustling and snapping twigs, seemed to follow him wherever he went. He would catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of his eye, but every time he turned to look, the trees were still. Just the forest. As dusk approached, Tyler found himself standing at the edge of the lookout, his flashlight casting long shadows across the dense woods below. The sun was nearly gone, but there was a lingering, unnerving glow to the horizon, a dull yellowish hue that didn't sit right with him. It wasn't the warmth of a setting sun. It felt more like a presence, a thick fog that had settled within the forest, clinging to the trees. With a deep breath, Tyler turned and made his way back to the tower. He locked the door behind him, but the sound of footsteps outside made his stomach twist. Something was out there. Something was watching. He checked his equipment, the radio still silent. He knew he needed to keep his head clear and stay vigilant. Fire season was upon them, and the forest could be unpredictable. Yet, as he scanned the tree line once more, the words from the radio echoed in his mind. It's not just wind. The night would be long. The next day, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The quiet had grown deeper, thicker, oppressive, almost suffocating. The wind that usually whispered through the pines was absent, leaving only the faintest rustle of leaves against the ground. No chirps from the birds, no rustle from small animals in the underbrush, just silence. An unsettling silence. Even the usual hum of insects had ceased, as if the forest itself had fallen into a deep, unnatural slumber. Tyler walked the perimeter of the tower, trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety gnawing at his gut. His boots crunched lightly over the dry needles and dirt as he made his way along the path, but everything around him seemed too still. He felt like the very air had thickened, pressing against his chest with each breath. It was only day 2, and yet the sense of isolation had already started to turn into something else, something darker, more dangerous. He stopped for a moment, standing at the edge of the forest, staring into the deep green. It was as though the trees were alive, not in the way he'd always known them, but in some ancient, hidden way. The trunks seemed to loom larger, their branches reaching out like twisted, gnarled fingers. He couldn't see anything in the underbrush, but he could almost feel the eyes of the forest on him, watching, waiting. He shook his head, trying to dispel the thought. "Just nerves," he muttered to himself. "You're just not used to the solitude yet." He returned to the tower, where the silence only seemed to deepen. No humming of insects, no creaking of the wooden structure, just the muffled beat of his own heart. He went through his daily checks, marking off his observations in the logbook, trying to keep his mind occupied. The afternoon dragged on, each minute stretching longer than the last. Even the radio, which usually crackled with routine check-ins, was eerily quiet. His attempts to contact headquarters only resulted in the same static hiss, as if the outside world had forgotten him. At 3 p.m., Tyler finally took a break and stepped outside to get some fresh air. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. But as he stood there, staring at the horizon, a strange feeling washed over him, one that made his blood run cold. It wasn't the typical evening chill settling in. It was the silence again. The absence of everything. A ripple of unease passed through him. It was as though the forest itself had stopped breathing. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the forest's edge, his eyes darting between the trees, seeking anything out of the ordinary. But there was nothing. No movement. Just the stillness. And then he heard it. A whisper. A faint rustling sound that came from the trees behind him, too soft to be the wind, too measured to be an animal. Tyler's body tensed and he spun around, raising the binoculars to his eyes. Nothing. The trees were still. But the whisper remained. In his mind. Growing louder, clearer. Tyler. The voice was not his own, not human at all. It was faint, distorted, as if it had been carried on the wind itself, filtering through the trees. His heart began to race. He stood frozen, scanning the area, but he saw nothing that could have caused it. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled as he lowered the binoculars. The voice didn't fade, instead growing louder, more insistent. "Tyler. You need to listen. They're coming." Tyler staggered back, his hands gripping the edge of the tower's railing. The whisper faded for a moment, and then just as quickly it came again, clearer than before. "They're watching. You're not alone." The forest seemed to pulse around him, as if something were stirring beneath the ground, beneath the very roots of the trees. Tyler's pulse thudded in his ears, drowning out all other sound. The wind picked up again, this time in harsh, unrelenting gusts that shook the trees. It was like the forest was coming alive, as if everything had been waiting for him to hear the warning. The radio crackled to life then, but it wasn't the usual check-in from headquarters. No, it was something else. A voice. Faint, almost unintelligible at first, but growing clearer as it pushed through the static. "Tyler. Tower 3. They are coming, it's too late." Tyler grabbed the radio, his hands shaking, his voice tight with fear. "Who is this?" he demanded, his throat dry. "What's happening? Where are you?" The voice on the radio was garbled, and then, suddenly, there was nothing but static again. Wait. Tyler cried, but the line was dead. The signal was gone. He stumbled back into the tower, panic rising in his chest. The wind outside howled, rattling the windows. He checked his equipment, the radio, the satellite phone. Nothing. All dead. The silence that had once been so unsettling had turned into something more sinister. He knew he wasn't imagining it. The trees, the whispers, the voice on the radio, they were all connected. The forest was trying to tell him something, but what? The tower creaked, a low groan, like a warning from the wood itself. Tyler spun around, eyes wide, his heart racing as he gripped the knife at his side. There was a sound coming from the stairs. Slow. Methodical. Step after step. Something, or someone, was climbing toward him. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as he stood frozen, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. He tried to call for help, but the radio remained silent. The footsteps grew louder. And then, just as quickly as they had started, they stopped. Tyler's pulse hammered in his ears as he slowly backed toward the door. His hand gripped the knife, knuckles white. He knew he had to get out of there. He had to leave the tower, leave this place. But every instinct told him that whatever was outside the door wasn't human. With trembling hands, Tyler turned the key in the lock. The door swung open, but the night air was thick with that same oppressive silence. The footsteps, the whispers, everything had led him here. He wasn't sure if he was running towards something or running away. But whatever was in the forest wasn't going to let him leave that easily. As he stepped into the darkness, the trees seemed to close in on him. He could feel their eyes watching him, their branches clawing at his skin. And in the distance he heard it again. A voice. This time much closer. Tyler. And then the trees began to move. Tyler's heart pounded as he moved deeper into the forest, each step feeling more uncertain than the last. The oppressive silence hung over the trees like a shroud, broken only by the soft crunch of his boots against the damp earth. His flashlight flickered weakly in the dense fog that had settled over the forest floor, swallowing up the path ahead. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches twisting into the mist, creating shapes that seemed to shift and change with every blink. The wind, which had been so fierce earlier, had died down completely, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. Tyler's breath came out in short, sharp bursts, visible in the cool night air. The whispers, the voice from the radio, the sound of the footsteps on the stairs, had all led him to this point, and now there was no going back. His radio was still dead, his phone still had no service. He was completely alone. A cold shiver ran down his spine as his eyes scanned the fog around him. Every movement, every shift in the air felt like it carried a weight of something watching him. He gripped his knife tightly, his senses on high alert. The forest, once comforting in its quiet isolation, now felt like a labyrinth, filled with something far darker than anything he had ever imagined. Then he saw it, a figure standing motionless ahead, partially obscured by the mist. Tyler froze. At first, he thought it might be another ranger, someone who had somehow arrived in this desolate area without him noticing. But as he got closer, he realized something was wrong. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge his presence. It was as if it was waiting for something, or someone. His stomach clenched with unease. "Hey!" Tyler called out, his voice shaky despite his attempt to sound commanding. "Are you lost?" No response. The figure remained eerily still, a shadow in the fog, its back to him. Tyler hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He took a cautious step forward. "Hey!" he said again, louder this time. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Finally, the figure turned. Tyler's breath hitched. The person who faced him was a man, but there was something strange about him. Something unnatural. His eyes, Tyler noticed first, were the color of the fog itself. Pale, gray, almost lifeless. They didn't blink, didn't move, as though they were made of glass. The man's skin was unervingly smooth, as if untouched by time, and his clothes, once dark, were now stained with the telltale grime of the forest, though they looked strangely new, too new for someone who had been out here for long. I thought I heard something," the man said, his voice low, hoarse but calm, too calm for someone standing alone in the woods at night. Tyler's instincts screamed at him to be cautious. There was something off about this man. His eyes never left Tyler's, unblinking, unwavering, like he was studying him. Tyler's fingers tightened around the hilt of his knife. "What are you doing out here?" Tyler asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Where did you come from?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he seemed to look past Tyler, his gaze drifting through the fog as if he could see something that Tyler could not. The silence stretched out between them like a thick cord, tying them together in an invisible tension. "Lost," the man finally replied, his lips barely moving. Looking for something." Tyler narrowed his eyes. "What are you looking for?" The man tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question for the first time. "I'm not sure," he said slowly. "Maybe you can help me find it." The words felt like a subtle invitation, a pull that Tyler couldn't fully understand. He glanced around, feeling the weight of the forest around him, the oppressive silence pressing down on him from all sides. The man stood still, waiting for Tyler to respond, but Tyler couldn't shake the sense that the encounter wasn't as random as it seemed. "I don't think you should be out here," Tyler said, his voice growing firmer, his suspicion deepening. "It's not safe. You should head back to the station." The man's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but that was enough to make Tyler's blood run cold. The look in his eyes was knowing. It was as if he had been waiting for Tyler, as if he had known exactly what Tyler would say. The man took a slow step forward, and Tyler instinctively took a step back, putting distance between them. "I don't need to go back," the man said quietly. "I've already been where you are. I've already seen what you've seen." Tyler's chest tightened as the words sank in. Something about them felt too familiar, like an echo of something he hadn't yet understood. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice strained. The man took another step forward, his movements fluid and unervingly deliberate. "You don't understand yet, but you will," he said. His smile was thin, almost sad. "Everything is a pattern. Look, you're already part of it." Tyler's pulse quickened, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. His hand twitched toward his knife, but something held him back. His mind screamed to run, but his body was frozen in place, like a deer caught in the headlights. "What loop?" Tyler managed to ask, though his voice sounded distant to his own ears. The man stepped even closer, his pale eyes boring into Tyler's. "The forest knows you, Tyler. It's been waiting for you. Waiting for someone like you. Someone who can break the pattern." Tyler's heart skipped a beat. "Break the pattern? What are you talking about?" The man smiled again, but it was colder this time, his teeth too sharp, too white. "You'll see," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The forest speaks to those who listen. But you can't leave until you understand." The words hung in the air, the weight of them sinking into Tyler's chest, making it harder to breathe. The fog seemed to thicken around him, and the trees loomed ever closer, their shadows twisting and changing in ways that didn't seem natural. Suddenly, the man's smile faded, and his eyes flickered with something darker. A shift in the air made Tyler's blood run cold. He felt it, the faintest tremor in the ground beneath his feet, the subtle shift in the atmosphere that told him something was wrong, something was coming. He glanced around quickly, his heart pounding as the forest seemed to hold its breath. The man stepped back into the mist, his form blending into the fog. "You'll find me again," he said, his voice fading. "But you won't remember this moment." Before Tyler could respond, the figure was gone, swallowed by the mist. Tyler stood alone in the forest, the silence pressing in on him once more. The fog had grown thicker, colder. His breath came in ragged gasps as the words echoed in his mind, bouncing around in his skull like an unwanted memory. He couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't just a random meeting, that it was part of something much bigger, something far darker, that had been unfolding long before he arrived. The man's words lingered in the air, and the deeper Tyler tried to understand them, the more they seemed to unravel the very reality around him. With a sharp exhale, Tyler took a step forward, his mind racing. He had to find answers. But as the mist closed in around him, he realized that finding those answers might come with a price he wasn't sure he was ready to pay. And something in the forest whispered, "You're already too late." The morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Tyler hadn't slept well the night before, his mind still reeling from the strange encounter with the man in the mist. He felt like something was lurking in the woods, watching him, waiting. The silence of the forest seemed heavier than it ever had before, the birds that had once filled the air with their songs now gone. The stillness only amplified the unease gnawing at him. He shook off the lingering feeling and focused on the task at hand. The forest had always been his place of refuge, a place where he could think clearly and find peace, but lately, everything felt off. Even the weather was changing, the temperature dropping drastically overnight. A fresh layer of snow covered the ground, glittering in the weak morning light like a blank canvas. Tyler grabbed his gear, his footsteps crunching loudly in the cold silence. He scanned the area, making sure the perimeter was secure. His eyes wandered over the landscape, watching for any signs of danger, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the endless stretch of trees and snow. He was about to turn back to the tower when something caught his eye. A set of tracks, clear against the snow, leading off the main trail and deeper into the woods. Tyler's pulse quickened as he crouched down for a closer look. The tracks were strange, unlike any animal he had ever seen in the forest. They were large, far too large for any known creature in the Smoky Mountains. The shape of the prints was unmistakably human, but there was something off about them. The toes were elongated, too long, and each one ended in sharp, curved claws that dug deep into the snow. The prints were spaced unusually far apart, as though the creature had been moving at a pace far faster than any human could. Tyler's stomach tightened. There was no mistaking it, these tracks didn't belong to any animal he recognized. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible sight in front of him. What the hell could make tracks like this? He stood up slowly, his hand instinctively reaching for the radio on his belt. He was about to call in a report when a sudden, unexplainable chill ran through him. The tracks. They didn't just go in a straight line. They turned abruptly, leading off the trail and deeper into the dense trees. As if the creature knew it was being followed. Tyler hesitated. His training told him to follow the tracks, to investigate, to understand what kind of danger was lurking in these woods. But something held him back. The fear gnawing at his gut was more than just instinct. It was something deeper, something primal. He couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was pushing him away, as if it didn't want him to go any further. But Tyler wasn't one to back down. He had a job to do. He followed the tracks, his boots sinking slightly into the snow with each step. The world around him seemed to close in, the trees growing thicker, the fog thicker, until he could barely see a few feet ahead. The air was heavy with something unnameable, the weight of expectation, the promise of something just beyond his reach. The tracks wound through the forest, leading him in circles back and forth, until Tyler couldn't tell where they began and where they ended. Every time he thought he was getting closer to something, the tracks seemed to vanish into the trees, only to reappear several yards away. He was lost. Lost in the tracks, in the strange rhythm of the creature's movements, in the silent watchful eyes of the forest itself. There was no sign of anything unusual, no movement, no rustling in the trees, but Tyler could feel it. Something was watching him. Something was waiting. Then, as if on cue, the tracks stopped. Tyler stood still, staring at the empty patch of snow ahead. The creature, whatever it was, had vanished without a trace. There was nothing. No sign of struggle, no broken branches, nothing to indicate where it had gone. He stood there, scanning the area, his breath coming in quick bursts. A growing sense of dread filled him as he realized the tracks were no longer there, not even in the snow. The ground was undisturbed, as if the creature had never been there at all. Tyler's heart raced as his hand moved back to his radio. This wasn't right. There was no way that something could just disappear like that, not without leaving a trace. But the silence in the air pressed in on him, the stillness suffocating. No rustling of leaves, no distant bird calls. Only the eerie, unnatural quiet of the forest. He turned to leave, but then something caught his eye. A flash of movement, too quick for him to process, a shadow darting just out of sight between the trees. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as he whipped around, his heart hammering in his chest. But there was nothing. Just the trees. Just the snow. Tyler stood frozen, his hands still gripping the radio, but he didn't move. He couldn't move. The forest had become a maze, and he had walked too deep into it. The tracks were gone. The creature was gone. But whatever had been here was still watching him, lurking just out of sight. Waiting. Tyler swallowed hard, his mind racing. What the hell had he just encountered? What was in these woods? And most importantly, what was it waiting for? As the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long dark shadows across the snow, Tyler made his way back to the tower, his steps quickening as the weight of the silence settled over him. The tracks, the mysterious creature, they were only the beginning. Something was out there, something ancient and patient, and it wasn't done with him yet. Tyler had a feeling that this was only the start of something far worse. Tyler's day had begun like any other in the wilderness of the Great Smoky Mountains, but the uneasy feeling that had clung to him since his encounter with the strange tracks refused to go away. As the light dimmed, casting long shadows across the forest, he sat at his desk inside the lookout tower, reviewing his notes. His radio crackled intermittently with static, and the silence outside was oppressive, like the forest was holding its breath. He had secured the tower, checked the perimeter, and even taken a short walk to stretch his legs. The air was growing colder, and his thoughts kept drifting back to the strange feeling he had when the tracks had disappeared, as if something, or someone, had been toying with him. Tyler leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He needed rest, but sleep seemed impossible in the eerie quiet of the forest. The unsettling events of the last few days were starting to get to him. A creak of wood echoed through the cabin, followed by the soft sound of footsteps on the stairs. His heart skipped a beat. The door was locked, and he hadn't heard anyone approach from outside. With a quick motion, he grabbed the flashlight from his desk and crept toward the entrance. The footsteps stopped as abruptly as they had started, replaced by the unsettling silence that filled the air. Tyler stood still, his grip tight on the flashlight. His breath quickened. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, and the faint glow of the fading light made everything seem too still, too quiet. There was no sound of birds or insects, only the eerie creak of the old tower. He wasn't sure why he didn't call out or check through the window, but something told him it was better to stay quiet, to remain hidden. A gut feeling that screamed at him that this wasn't a normal visitor. The handle turned. The door creaked open slowly, and Tyler froze, his eyes fixed on the space just beyond the door. No one entered. For a moment all was still again. He waited, his heart hammering in his chest, the flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Then the door swung fully open and Tyler stepped back, startled. A man, tall and lean, stood at the threshold. His features were partially obscured by the shadows, but Tyler could see the dirt and grime on his clothes. Evidence of someone who had been wandering for days, not just lost for a few hours. The man's face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking, as if he hadn't seen daylight in a long time. "I'm lost," the man said, his voice low and hoarse as though it had been unused for too long. "I've been wandering these woods for days. Can you help me?" Tyler's instinct screamed at him to say something, to ask the man questions, but he couldn't quite form the words. There was something in the man's eyes, something that didn't sit right. Something that made Tyler feel uneasy in his gut. The stranger stepped forward, slowly, without waiting for an invitation. Tyler didn't move, his hand still holding the flashlight as if it were a weapon. "Come in," Tyler said, his voice stiff. "You've got to be freezing. I'll get you some water." The man nodded but didn't speak. As he stepped into the small cabin, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that the man had been waiting for him to invite him in, that he had known exactly what to do. Too calculated. Too calm. Tyler watched him carefully, his every sense on high alert. He glanced around the room and it was then that he realized something was wrong. Something was off. His personal belongings, his maps, his notes, even his personal effects had been moved. His backpack was open and a few of his things were scattered across the table. His heart rate quickened. The stranger, still silent, was slowly removing his gloves. Tyler's mind raced. How had the man gotten in? He had locked the door. He hadn't heard anyone approach. And yet everything seemed too normal. Too calculated. "Did you go through my things?" Tyler asked, his voice suddenly sharp, the question escaping before he could stop it. The man looked at him, blinking as if the question confused him. Then a faint, almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of his lips. It wasn't a reassuring smile though. No, the man said, his voice quiet, almost too smooth. "I didn't touch anything. I'm just lost. Just looking for help." Tyler took a slow, cautious step toward the table, his eyes scanning his things for anything that seemed out of place. His knife was gone. And the small medical kit he always kept near the door was missing as well. He had only just gotten a clear look at the man's face when the stranger's smile widened, this time more noticeable, but still not quite right. The man stepped back and slowly took a seat in the corner of the room, as if he was already settling in for the night. Tyler's mind raced. This wasn't a normal situation. He wasn't sure why, but everything about this man seemed off. The way he moved, the way he spoke, even the strange tension in the air. Nothing added up. The way the man had appeared on the stairs, his sudden calmness, it felt staged. Too controlled. Tyler's eyes flicked to the radio. His mind told him to call headquarters, but something held him back. What if this wasn't a rescue operation? What if something more sinister was at play? What if there was more to this man than met the eye? As Tyler thought, the stranger seemed to grow more comfortable, leaning back in the chair as if he'd been there before. He casually watched Tyler, his gaze fixed but almost too casual. Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that this man knew exactly what he was doing. The longer Tyler stared at him, the more the strange unease settled over him. His training kicked in, he needed to stay alert. He needed to be careful. The stranger's eyes didn't leave him as he spoke again, his voice low and steady. "You've been waiting for me, haven't you?" Tyler froze. The words hung in the air like a poison. His skin crawled. "What are you talking about?" Tyler replied, his voice strained, his grip tightening around the flashlight. The man only smiled again. It was a slow, knowing smile, the kind that didn't feel real. "I've been waiting for you too, Ranger Mitchell." Tyler's heart skipped a beat as the words hit him with a cold, gut-wrenching force. His instincts screamed at him to get away, to retreat, but the door was behind the stranger, and it was locked. Tyler swallowed hard, his breath shallow, trying to keep calm. What was this man's game? And why did he feel like something far more dangerous was hidden beneath his calm exterior? And just then the radio crackled. The static hissed and popped, but before Tyler could react, the voice that came through was unmistakable, distorted, as if it were coming from far, far away. "They're not who they say they are. Watch your back, Ranger. They've been watching you." The message cut off abruptly. Tyler's gaze shot to the radio. The man in the corner didn't move, but the smile on his face widened just slightly, like he knew exactly what was happening. Tyler's instincts told him everything he needed to know. The walls of the tower were closing in on him. There was no escape. Not yet. But there was something he could do. Tyler's fingers tightened around the flashlight, his other hand slowly reaching for his radio. It was time to figure out just who this man was, and why he had been waiting for him. Tyler's boots crunched softly on the underbrush as he made his way through the dense forest. The sun had long since disappeared behind the horizon, leaving only the eerie twilight to guide him. The events of the last few days weighed heavily on his mind. The strange visitor, the unsettling message over the radio, and the increasing sense of being watched. But there was something more pressing now. The cave. He had found the entrance earlier in the day, partially obscured by thick vines and shadows. From a distance, it had appeared to be nothing more than a natural formation, a simple crack in the mountainside. But now that he stood before it, flashlight in hand, the darkness seemed to shift unnaturally. The air around the cave felt different, damp, heavy with a chill that seemed to seep into his bones. Tyler hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure what he was expecting to find. But after everything he had experienced so far, a strange, gnawing curiosity had begun to take root in him. The cave had called to him like a whisper in the wind, urging him to explore further, to find the truth about the strange visitor, about the eerie whispers, about the forest that had become something other than what he knew. With a final deep breath, Tyler stepped into the mouth of the cave. His flashlight beam danced over the jagged walls, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and shift like dark figures in the corners of his vision. The cave seemed to swallow up the sounds of the forest, leaving him in an oppressive silence. The further he ventured, the colder it became. His breath fogged in front of him, and the walls narrowed as he descended deeper. The air smelled of earth and decay, a musty scent that reminded him of old, forgotten places. His heart raced with each step. It wasn't just the isolation that unnerved him, it was the feeling that the cave itself was alive, that it was watching him, studying him as much as he was trying to understand it. And then he heard it. A whisper. Soft at first, so faint he could almost convince himself it was just the wind. But as he moved deeper into the cave, the whispering grew clearer. It wasn't a single voice, but a collection of voices, layered over one another like echoes bouncing off the walls. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable, low, urgent, almost pleading. Tyler's pulse quickened. He couldn't see anyone. He was alone, wasn't he? But as the voices grew louder, he felt a strange pressure in his chest, like something was pushing against him. Something ancient. Something that didn't belong. The tunnel widened, and his flashlight caught something unusual on the ground. The surface was covered with faint scratches, as though something had been dragged across the stone. He knelt down, his fingers brushing against the marks, and found something even stranger, a pile of old, discarded clothes. Not just any clothes, though. These were old, frayed, and stained. Some of them had been torn as if someone had struggled to remove them. Tyler's eyes narrowed, and he began to examine the area more carefully. The deeper into the cave he went, the more disturbing the discoveries became. There were other items, small personal effects scattered about. A watch, its glass cracked. A blood-stained scarf. A journal, its pages yellowed with age, written in a language he didn't recognize. As he reached for the journal, a sudden shiver ran down his spine. It wasn't the cold that caused it. No, it was the overwhelming sense that he wasn't alone. The air in the cave seemed to thicken around him, pressing in on all sides. His breathing became shallow, and the whispers, they were louder now, as if they were all around him. He turned sharply, expecting to see someone behind him. But the cave was empty. The only movement was the slight sway of his flashlight's beam, catching shadows that seemed to move with a mind of their own. Tyler's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the full extent of what was happening. The cave wasn't just a cave. It was a prison. And he was its newest prisoner. He scrambled to his feet and backed away from the strange items, his flashlight flicking over the walls. That's when he saw it. At first, it was just a faint shape in the distance, a figure standing in the dark. No, not standing. Hovering. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as the figure became clearer, its form rising from the shadows. It wasn't human. It was something else, something long and thin like a wraith, its limbs contorted in unnatural angles. Its face was pale, featureless except for two dark, hollow eyes that stared straight at him, unmoving. Tyler felt his legs freeze, rooted to the ground by the creature's gaze. Its eyes seemed to pierce through him, digging into his very soul. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if they were urging him to move, to run. But he couldn't. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the creature. The figure began to float toward him, its movements slow but deliberate, each step leaving a trail of shimmering darkness behind it. Tyler's mind screamed at him to run, to escape, but his body refused to obey. Then, just as the creature was almost within arm's reach, A sudden sound broke through the oppressive silence. The unmistakable crack of a branch snapping, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the cave. Tyler's eyes snapped toward the noise, his flashlight catching another figure in the distance. A person, human. The figure was stumbling toward him, covered in dirt and blood. Their eyes were wide and wild, and they moved with an unnatural urgency, as if they were being driven by something. Tyler didn't know what to do. He didn't know who to trust. The figure that had appeared before him wasn't human. But the person now approaching, they were alive, weren't they? The creature in the shadows seemed to sense the other figure's presence. It paused, its hollow eyes shifting from Tyler to the newcomer. And then it spoke. Its voice was not a whisper, but a loud, chilling growl that rumbled through the cave, reverberating off the walls. "Leave this place. It is not meant for you." The words were so clear, so forceful, that Tyler couldn't help but flinch. The figure didn't move, but the air seemed to pulse with energy, as if the very cave itself was alive, breathing in tandem with the creature. Tyler didn't know what was happening, but he knew one thing for sure: this place was cursed. And whatever had brought him here, whatever force was driving him deeper into the cave, was about to reveal its true nature. He needed to escape. But the question was, would he make it out alive? Tyler's flashlight flickered as he navigated the thick underbrush, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The air in the forest felt heavier than before, thick with the strange stillness that had overtaken the Great Smoky Mountains. He couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong, that something was waiting for him just out of sight. The radio call had come in early that morning, urgent but distant. The ranger team had been searching for Jason Miller, one of their own, for over 24 hours now. Miller had gone missing during a routine patrol near the eastern ridge. No distress signal, no indication of what had happened. His last known location had been near the base of a steep cliffside, just a few miles north of Tyler's own position. Tyler had volunteered to search the area, hoping to find some clue, anything that might explain where Miller had gone. The dense fog from the night before had lifted slightly, but the atmosphere was still thick with an unnatural silence. Birds were no longer singing. The usual rustling of animals in the undergrowth had ceased. The deeper Tyler ventured, the more the sense of unease grew. The path grew narrower and the trees seemed to close in around him, their twisted branches reaching toward him like fingers in the dark. He didn't know if it was the eerie quiet or something more sinister, but his skin prickled as though every step was watched. He reached the edge of the cliffside by late afternoon, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. The rocky terrain stretched out before him, jagged and unforgiving. The view down to the valley below was dizzying, steep, almost vertical, with patches of moss and broken tree limbs scattered across the rocks. Tyler crouched low, scanning the ground with his flashlight, searching for any sign of Miller's whereabouts. There were no footprints, no signs of a struggle. Just the same unsettling stillness that had plagued the entire forest. As he stood up to move farther along the cliffside, something caught his eye. A flash of movement. Just beyond the rocks. Tyler froze, his heart racing. He was sure he had seen something. But when he turned, there was nothing, only the sheer rock face and the deep shadows beyond it. "Jason." Tyler called out, his voice cracking in the silence. There was no answer. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Something was wrong. He couldn't explain why, but the air felt like it was thickening, like it was pushing in on him from all sides. He glanced to his left, where a small crevice in the cliffside caught his attention. It was a tight, narrow gap, barely big enough for a man to squeeze through. Tyler hesitated for a moment, then made his way toward it, crouching low as he carefully navigated the sharp rocks. He pulled himself through the gap and found himself in a small, hidden hollow, surrounded by overgrown ferns and moss-covered boulders. At first he didn't see anything unusual, but then his flashlight beam caught something, a shape lying in the dirt. Tyler's heart sank as he crouched beside the body. It was Jason Miller. But something wasn't right. Miller's body was cold, unnaturally still. His eyes were wide open, staring at the sky with a hollow emptiness. His face was pale, almost lifeless, and his skin had an unnatural sheen to it, as if it had been touched by something otherworldly. There was no blood, no sign of a violent struggle. He looked as though he had simply collapsed, yet there was something more sinister to the way he lay there. Tyler carefully checked for a pulse. There was none. His body was too still, too lifeless. He couldn't explain why, but a knot of dread settled in his stomach. His gaze shifted down to Miller's clothing. It was torn, but not from the forest. The rips weren't consistent with an animal attack or a fall. They looked deliberate. The stitching on his uniform had been carefully torn, almost as if someone had wanted to expose what lay underneath. A chill ran down Tyler's spine as he noticed something odd, a small dark mark on the back of Miller's neck just beneath the collar. It looked like a bruise but deeper, darker. A strange, unnatural shape that seemed to pulse with a dark energy of its own. "What the hell happened to you, Miller?" Tyler muttered, standing up, his mind racing. But as he turned to leave, a noise broke the silence. A faint crackling sound, like footsteps on dry leaves, came from behind him. Tyler whipped around, his heart pounding in his chest. The figure standing in the shadows was tall, dressed in a Forest Service uniform. Tyler's stomach dropped. It looked exactly like Jason Miller. "Jason," Tyler called, stepping toward the figure. But something about the way it moved, too fluid, too precise, made him pause. The man's posture was perfect, almost too perfect, like a mannequin or a shadow from a bad dream. The figure raised its head, locking eyes with Tyler. There was no recognition in those eyes, no warmth. Just cold, hollow emptiness. The skin of his face was stretched too tight, the features too sharp, like a mask that had been forced over someone else's. Tyler took a cautious step back, reaching for his radio. The figure took a step toward him, its movements eerily synchronized. "Jason?" Tyler asked again, but his voice faltered. This wasn't the Jason he knew. This was something else. Something wrong. The figure tilted its head, the same mechanical movements that felt out of place. "Tyler?" The voice rasped, but it wasn't Jason's voice. It was something distorted, as if someone was trying to imitate him but couldn't quite get it right. "They found me." Tyler's hand tightened on the radio, his heart pounding as the figure took another step forward. He wanted to run, to get as far away from this thing as possible, but his legs felt like lead. The creature, whatever it was closing in. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure stopped. It stood motionless, like a statue, its eyes never leaving Tyler's. Tyler's breath caught in his throat as he turned and ran, pushing through the underbrush with frantic energy. He couldn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoed behind him, like a steady beat to his panic. He could feel the thing following him, stalking him, its hollow gaze burning into the back of his skull. His legs burned with exertion, and the cold air bit at his lungs, but he kept running, forcing himself forward, through the twisted branches and over the rough terrain. It was only when he reached the clearing near the ridge that he dared to look over his shoulder. The figure was gone. But as the forest around him fell silent again, a question lingered in his mind. Had Jason Miller really disappeared? Or had something else taken his place, something that wore his skin and echoed his voice? Tyler didn't have the answers. All he had was the chilling knowledge that whatever had taken Miller was still out there, waiting for its next victim. The forest had never felt this oppressive. The usual beauty of the Great Smoky Mountains, with its mist rolling over the ridges and the symphony of nature playing in the background, now felt like a dark stage, the trees mere actors standing in the wings. Tyler's every step echoed too loudly in his ears, and the silence between those steps was deafening. He'd long lost track of time, days melding into one another in a hazy blur of dread and confusion. After the strange encounter with the figure that wore Jason Miller's face, Tyler had been on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was constantly watching him, lurking just beyond the treeline. Every movement seemed to be mirrored, every shift in the shadows felt deliberate, like a ghostly reflection of his own actions. But he hadn't seen anything, not yet. He trudged through the thick brush, the weight of his rifle heavy against his chest. His fingers were sore from gripping it so tightly. Every now and then he would glance over his shoulder, half expecting to see that familiar, distorted figure of Miller, or someone else, something else, looming just behind him. But there was nothing. His thoughts began to drift as he moved, the gnawing unease clouding his mind. "What's happening to me?" he thought. "What is this place?" A rustling noise pulled him back to reality. Tyler froze, his pulse quickening. The sound came from behind him. It was too deliberate to be an animal, too measured, too familiar. His breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned around. Standing just a few yards away, framed by the gnarled trees and the creeping mist, was the silhouette of a man. His heart skipped a beat. No, it wasn't a man. Not exactly. The figure stood motionless, like it was waiting for something. His posture was too perfect, too still. Tyler squinted through the mist, his hand instinctively going to the knife at his side. It looked like him. Same height. Same build. Same features. Impossible. The figure took a slow step toward him and Tyler's breath hitched. The movement was so precise, so exact, It was like he was looking at a reflection of himself. The sound of his own boots crunching in the leaves was now echoed by the figures. Tyler staggered back, his mind racing. "Who are you?" he called, his voice hoarse, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it mimicked him, its lips moving in time with Tyler's own. "Who are you?" the figure echoed, its voice identical to Tyler's, only hollow, without any of the urgency or fear in his tone. Tyler's stomach dropped. He had no idea how this was happening, but his instincts screamed that he needed to get away, fast. But when he tried to step back, the figure did the same, mirroring his movements as if it were a perfect copy, as if it had studied him. His heart raced. "It knows what I'm going to do. It's mimicking me." He turned on his heel and sprinted, the sound of the figure's footsteps trailing behind him, always perfectly synchronized with his own. Each time he looked over his shoulder, it was still there, a mirror image of himself, its eyes eerily blank. His mind spun. He couldn't outrun it. Every move he made, the figure copied, right down to the smallest twitch of his fingers, the way his legs moved, the tension in his shoulders. It was as if the forest itself had created an exact replica of him, a shadow that existed only to track his every move. Tyler could feel it in the pit of his stomach. The creature, the mimic, wasn't just following him. It was studying him, learning, perfecting. And then, without warning, it spoke again. Its voice was smoother now, more confident. "Tyler, do you really think you can escape me?" Tyler's chest tightened. That voice, it sounded just like him, but it wasn't him. The words weren't his. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like they were made of stone, unyielding, heavy. The figure's lips curled into a smile, but it was wrong. Its grin was too wide, too artificial, like a broken mask stretched over a face that wasn't meant to wear it. The smile didn't reach the eyes were hollow. Empty. Tyler stumbled to a stop and spun around. His hand shot to his rifle, but as he raised it, the figure did the same, the rifle mirroring his exact movement. For a terrifying moment, Tyler couldn't tell who was real and who was the mimic. Were he and this thing one and the same? Was he even still himself anymore? His breath came out in short, sharp gasps as he struggled to steady his hands. The mimic raised its rifle too. Tyler watched, frozen, as the creature slowly, deliberately, pointed the barrel at him. The silence that followed felt suffocating, thick with an energy that made his skin crawl. "You know, Tyler," the creature's voice came again, this time with a touch of amusement. "You can run. You can try to fight. But it won't matter. It never matters." Tyler's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" he choked out. But the mimic didn't answer. Instead, it took a step forward, its movements slow, calculated. Tyler's heart pounded against his ribs as he backed away. It was too close. He couldn't take it anymore. With one final burst of adrenaline, Tyler swung his rifle and fired. The shot rang out, splitting the thick, unnatural silence of the forest. But when the smoke cleared, the figure was still there, standing as though nothing had happened. Tyler's eyes went wide. The bullet had gone through it. It hadn't even flinched. "No," Tyler whispered, his voice shaking. "This isn't real." But the creature didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless, as though waiting for him to make the next move. Tyler ran again, his heart in his throat, his body burning with fear. His mind screamed at him to get to safety, to get to his tower, to leave the forest. But no matter how fast he ran, no matter how far he pushed himself, the mimic stayed right behind him, its footsteps as synchronized with his as ever. It was as if it were always just a few steps behind, always mirroring him, a hollow echo of his every move. And Tyler knew, deep in his gut, that this thing wasn't just following him anymore. It had already taken his place. The mist was thicker now, curling around the trees like a creeping fog that seemed to devour the very air Tyler breathed. He moved with purpose, though each step felt heavier than the last. His mind raced, trying to process what had just happened with the mimic. The air was suffocating, the shadows around him clinging too close, as though the trees themselves had grown more watchful. Tyler had been running for what felt like hours, but the forest had a way of distorting time. It felt as if he hadn't moved at all, as though the very ground beneath his feet was changing with every turn. But in the distance something caught his eye, a break in the trees, a clearing. And in the middle of it, a dark shape loomed. A cabin. The sight of it was like a spark to dry tinder, igniting something deep within Tyler. He had no real reason to head toward it, but something about the cabin, standing so silently among the ancient trees, called to him. Maybe it was the need for shelter, or maybe the desperation to find answers to the madness that had been consuming him. But he found his legs moving toward it regardless. The cabin was small, a weathered structure with rotting wood and a sagging roof. It looked abandoned, forgotten by time. The front door hung loosely on one hinge, creaking faintly in the wind as Tyler approached. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away, but now, instead of dread, it was curiosity that gnawed at him. What could he find inside? Another clue, perhaps. Another piece of this twisted puzzle. Tyler pushed the door open with a groan, the old wood protesting under the pressure. The inside was dark, musty, and untouched by time, though the dust that settled over everything suggested no one had been there for years. A few broken chairs, a table tipped over in a corner, and shelves lined with decaying objects that looked like they'd been abandoned long before Tyler's arrival. The air inside was thick with mildew and rot, but it was still. Too still. Tyler stepped inside cautiously, his boots crunching on the dirt floor. His senses were on high alert, every muscle in his body primed for whatever might be lurking just out of sight. As he moved further into the cabin, something caught his eye, an old wooden desk tucked in the corner, its surface cluttered with papers and strange trinkets. He approached it slowly, hesitant but compelled. There was a journal there, its leather cover cracked and faded, but it was the only thing that seemed remotely important in the room. Tyler reached for it with trembling hands, his fingers brushing against the cool surface. He hesitated for a moment before opening it. The pages were yellowed with age, the writing inside sharp and precise, as if someone had meticulously detailed every moment of their life. But what stopped him cold was the date on the first page. It was today's date. December 9th, 2025. Tyler's heart skipped a beat. The journal was old, surely, but the writing was fresh. He flipped to the next page, and as he read, his stomach twisted into knots. The words were a perfect recounting of everything he had done since arriving at the cabin. Tyler Mitchell arrived in the clearing today. The mist is thick and the trees are watching. The words seemed to claw at his mind, growing more erratic with every page he turned. Descriptions of his every move, his every thought, even the things he had muttered to himself in the silence of the forest. It felt as though he had been followed, but more disturbing than that was the feeling that this journal knew him better than he knew himself. It had recorded his every moment, and not in the detached, impersonal way of a logbook or a report, but with an intimate understanding, like the writer had been inside his head. The mimic came to him at dusk, its footsteps following every one of his. Tyler tried to escape, but the woods would not let him. Tyler slammed the journal shut, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. His breath came in shallow gasps as he tried to steady his hands. The weight of the journal felt too much to bear, as though it were a curse instead of a tool. How could this be possible? Who could have written this? He turned, his eyes scanning the room in a panic. The cabin felt smaller now, suffocating. The air was thick with a sense of impending doom. The walls, the rafters, the floor, all felt like they were closing in on him. He had to get out. He couldn't breathe in here. It was too much. But as he turned to leave, something stopped him. A noise, faint but distinct. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, just outside the door. Tyler froze, his pulse pounding in his ears. He listened, trying to make out the sound, but it was impossible to know. The footsteps were too measured, too controlled. They were coming closer. He reached for the rifle slung across his back, his fingers trembling as he gripped the cold metal. He was ready. Whatever this was, he was done running. He wouldn't be caught by surprise again. The door creaked as it opened slightly, just enough for the figure on the other side to peer inside. And there, standing in the threshold, was a man. A stranger. A tall figure, cloaked in shadow, his face obscured by the dim light from the doorway. But Tyler knew. He knew with a certainty that sent chills down his spine. It was him. It was his face. Not the mimic, not a copy, but something far worse. The man stepped inside, moving just like Tyler, just like his reflection in a mirror. His clothes were ragged, his hair disheveled, but it was his eyes. Those eyes. Hollow. Empty. Dead. Tyler couldn't speak. The words died in his throat as he stared at this twisted version of himself. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the man's movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet whose strings had been pulled too tightly. It was like looking at the ghost of himself. The man smiled, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "You've been looking for answers, haven't you, Tyler?" he said, his voice a distorted echo of Tyler's own. Tyler took a step back, his hand tightening around the rifle. "No. No, this can't be real," Tyler whispered, barely able to comprehend what he was seeing. The figure tilted its head, its smile widening in that way that wasn't quite right. "It's very real. And you've been part of this story all along. The question is, are you going to finish it?" Tyler didn't wait for a second invitation. He turned and ran, not looking back, but the sound of his own footsteps echoing in his mind, a twisted, mocking reflection of his own actions. The walls of the cabin seemed to press in on him, the door swinging open wider with every step. And as he broke through the doorway and into the mist, the only thing that remained in his mind was a single, terrifying thought. What if he wasn't running anymore? The echo of his footsteps followed him, never stopping, never ending. The cabin had been quiet for hours after Tyler fled, its walls creaking as if mourning his departure. The heavy silence clung to the air like a damp fog, and for the first time since he arrived in the Smoky Mountains, Tyler felt truly alone. Alone but not safe. The sense of being watched hadn't dissipated. In fact, it had grown stronger, more oppressive. His every step seemed to echo through the mist, calling attention to his presence. Tyler moved through the dense forest, heading back toward the station with urgency in his movements. He couldn't shake the image of that man, that thing, standing in the doorway of the cabin, wearing his face, his voice, and the look of something that had been molded from the deepest recesses of his own fears. But he couldn't stay in the forest forever. He needed answers. And there was one place he could think of that might hold them: the archives in the ranger station. Those archives had been untouched for years, locked away in a dusty room at the back of the building. He had always been told that the older records were considered irrelevant, too old, too disconnected from modern operations, but now Tyler knew better. The things he'd seen, the creatures he'd encountered, couldn't be dismissed as some distant anomaly. They were part of something much larger, a story written in forgotten files and hidden words. As he arrived at the station, the sun had already begun its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the clearing. Tyler took a deep breath, steadying himself for the long hours he would spend searching through papers, hoping to find something that would make sense of the horrors he'd been drawn into. He stepped inside, the musty air of the station wrapping around him like a cold embrace. The walls felt tighter now, as though they too were holding their breath in anticipation of what he might uncover. The room was silent, save for the rustle of papers and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. Tyler's heart thudded as he began to sift through the papers. His eyes scanned for anything out of the ordinary, anything that might hint at the monstrous entities he'd encountered in the woods. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through a stack of weathered documents. And then he found it. A leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. He opened it carefully, his eyes widening as he read the first entry. The skin takers have come again. We've seen their work, felt their presence. The rangers who have gone missing are never found, their faces twisted into something else, something new. They wear the skins of those they kill, walking among us, speaking in their voices. They're not human. They never were. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. He turned the pages with shaking hands, his mind struggling to process what he was reading. The entries grew more frantic, more desperate. The writer spoke of strange disappearances, rangers who had vanished without a trace, their bodies never recovered. Some had returned, but they were never the same. Their movements were off. Their faces were wrong. And their voices? Hollow. Empty. They have learned our habits, studied our weaknesses. They change their shape, assuming the guise of those they take. They are patient. They wait for the right moment. And when they take you, they leave behind only the skin, the shell. The rest is lost. Tyler's pulse quickened as he turned the pages faster now, each one more unsettling than the last. The entries grew more urgent, written in a scrawl that was becoming harder to decipher. And then, near the back of the journal, he found the final entry. It was barely legible, but he could make out the words. We cannot escape them. They are inside us. They are us. And when the cycle is complete, when they have taken enough, they will wear our skins. All of us. And there will be nothing left but them. A chill ran down Tyler's spine as he closed the journal. The weight of what he had read hung over him like a suffocating cloud. The skin takers. He had heard whispers about such creatures, but never anything concrete. Nothing that could explain what he had been seeing, what had been hunting him in the woods. These things were real. They had always been real. Tyler's mind raced as the implications began to sink in. He wasn't just being hunted. He was being studied. These creatures, these skin takers, were learning how to mimic human behavior, how to wear human skins like a coat. They had been doing it for years, perhaps longer, hiding in plain sight, slipping through the cracks in the forest like phantoms. And now they had targeted him. But it was worse than that. He wasn't just a victim. The journal had said it, the cycle. This wasn't the first time Tyler had been caught in this nightmare. Every time they took someone, every time they disappeared into the shadows of the forest, the cycle continued. The skin takers studied, adapted, and waited for the next chance to strike. Tyler slammed the journal shut, his hands shaking as he stood up. The weight of the knowledge pressed down on him. How many cycles had there been? And how many more were left before he became just another shell, another imitation? He couldn't stay in the station any longer. The cabin, the woods, the creatures, they were all part of this twisted game, this experiment that had been running for longer than anyone could fathom. But Tyler was done being a pawn. He had to end it. He had to find a way to break the cycle. With determination, he grabbed his gear and set out into the night. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches twisting in the wind, their shadows stretching long and dark. Tyler knew they were watching him. He could feel their eyes on him even if he couldn't see them. But tonight he wasn't going to run. Tonight he would find the answers. He would confront the skin takers, and if he had to, he would fight back. The forest was silent again, but Tyler could hear his own heartbeat in the stillness. He had no choice but to follow the trail. The cycle had to end, and he was going to be the one to stop it. The air in the forest was heavy, dense with an unseen pressure that made Tyler's chest tighten with every breath. It wasn't the usual weight of the damp woods, this was something else. It clung to his skin, crept into his thoughts, and wrapped itself around his mind. Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that he was slipping, like something was slowly unraveling the very fabric of his existence. As he trudged deeper into the wilderness, his boots crunching the wet undergrowth, something began to feel off. The trees, once familiar and comforting, now felt like they were closing in on him. Their twisted, gnarled branches seemed to reach out, moving in the windless air like silent hands, grasping, testing. It wasn't just the forest that was changing, it was him. The subtle changes were there, at first too small to notice. The shadows no longer stayed still at night. They flickered, bending in unnatural directions as if the moonlight was trying to hide from them. His mind seemed to betray him in flashes of confusion. Faces and places swirled in his thoughts like a storm, but when he tried to focus on them, they would dissolve into nothingness. Names escaped his memory as easily as they had come, and things that should have been clear now felt like distant fragments of a forgotten dream. "Focus, Tyler," he muttered to himself, but his voice seemed hollow, as though it came from somewhere far away. The words felt wrong, like they weren't his own. He stopped walking and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The familiar weight of his rifle in his hands was the only anchor to reality he could trust. He glanced around, scanning the dense trees. But there was nothing, only the silent, oppressive stillness of the woods. How long had he been walking? He couldn't remember. Time felt stretched, like it was bending around him. 1,000 questions filled his mind, but they vanished as quickly as they arrived. The trees loomed taller, their branches knotted and distorted as if they had grown in the wrong directions, toward a place Tyler could not follow. A flash of movement caught his eye, a figure standing just beyond the tree line, barely visible through the thicket. The figure's features were indistinct, like a smear of shadow against the moonlight. Tyler's hand instinctively reached for his gun, but his fingers froze just before they gripped the stock. His body trembled, but not from fear. Something was wrong with the way his body felt. His legs felt numb, and his heart was pounding erratically, thudding in his chest like a warning. He blinked and the figure was gone. Tyler shook his head, trying to clear the fog in his thoughts. Get it together, he thought, pushing forward. But as he walked, the forest around him seemed to shift. The path he had been following twisted in ways it shouldn't. Trees that were once to his left now loomed to his right, and the faint sounds of the woods, the usual rustling of leaves, the distant calls of night creatures, had all but vanished. In their place was an eerie, unnatural silence, broken only by the occasional echo of his own footsteps. The quiet was suffocating. His vision blurred for a moment, and when it cleared, he was no longer sure where he was. He stood in the middle of a clearing, the same one he had passed through earlier, but it felt wrong. The shadows were deeper here, darker than the night should allow, and the moonlight had a strange, sickly hue. He squinted, his head throbbing as he tried to process the disorienting shift in his surroundings. This place was familiar, too familiar. He had been here before. It hit him like a wave, crashing over him, dislodging his thoughts. He had walked this exact path, stood in this exact clearing, felt this exact chill down his spine. But how? How could that be possible? He hadn't turned back. He hadn't retraced his steps. The path had twisted, sure, but this was something else. The realization came in pieces, each one like a shard of glass cutting deeper into his mind. Had he been here before? Was he stuck in a loop? His body screamed for him to turn around, to escape, but the ground beneath him felt unstable, as though the earth itself was shifting with him. His thoughts blurred again, a nauseating spiral of confusion. Then he heard it. A whisper. A voice, his own voice, murmuring from the edge of his perception, too quiet to understand but too loud to ignore. Tyler. The voice wasn't his own. It was darker. Hollow. A twisted mockery of the sound that had once been his. His heart skipped, a cold sweat breaking out across his brow. He turned sharply, rifle raised, but there was nothing, no one. Just the trees, the shadows, and the heavy silence that pressed down around him. No, it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He had to be imagining things. His mind was playing tricks on him. But the longer he stood there, the more the shadows seemed to breathe. They shifted, fluttering like dark wings, stretching toward him, pulling him closer to their depths. He couldn't run. The air felt thick, suffocating, like the forest itself was a trap, closing in around him. The ground beneath him felt soft, like he was sinking into it. Every movement felt slow and deliberate, as if time itself was being stretched beyond recognition. His limbs moved like they were made of lead. The whisper came again. This time it was clearer. Tyler, we've been waiting for you. He spun around, his gun raised, but the clearing was empty. The trees were still. His breath was ragged in his throat, a mix of fear and confusion that swirled in his gut. It was impossible. But the voice continued. Tyler, you've always been here. The ground beneath his feet trembled as if the earth itself was responding. And then Tyler saw it. At the far edge of the clearing, beneath the thick boughs of a towering oak, stood a figure. It was barely more than a silhouette, a shadow in the dark, but Tyler could feel its presence, its weight, pressing down on him. The figure stepped forward, its shape indistinct, like a smudge against the moonlight. But Tyler's instinct screamed at him to run. Something was wrong with the way it moved, the way it tilted its head at an unnatural angle. He couldn't see its face, but he knew deep down that it was watching him. It was waiting for him to make the first move. The voice came again, but now it was everywhere. Inside his mind. Beneath his skin. All around him. Tyler, don't run. You can't escape this place. You are this place. He felt it, the truth of those words. His stomach churned as the weight of them sank deep into his bones. Was this what had been happening? Had he been trapped from the start? Was this whole thing a construct of his own mind, designed to break him down, to twist him into something else? Tyler, you're not leaving this time. The voice stopped, leaving nothing but the cold, steady pulse of his own breath. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, along with the figure, the forest, the very reality he had been living in. Tyler blinked, and he was standing alone, back at the edge of the clearing, the shadows gone, the voice silenced. The moon hung high above, untouched. His rifle still in his hands. But he knew. He knew that what he had just experienced was real. And he knew what it meant. Reality was no longer his ally. His mind was slipping, and the world was bending, warping into something else entirely. It was no longer a question of escaping the forest, of surviving the night. Now the only question was, could he trust himself long enough to find a way out? The cycle was breaking, and Tyler was at the center. But he was no longer sure where the world ended and where the nightmare began. Tyler had always known that the forest was alive with mysteries, creatures hidden in the dark, secrets buried beneath the soil, but never before had he felt so small in the face of it all. The trees, once towering guardians of the wilderness, now seemed to loom like ominous sentinels, their twisted branches reaching out toward him. The whispers in the air had become louder, more distinct, as though the very forest itself was speaking to him, its ancient voice cutting through the suffocating silence. And then the truth hit him like a sledgehammer. He was trapped. The realization was a slow, creeping horror. He had spent days, weeks, exploring this cursed forest, chasing shadows, following cryptic clues, only to find himself caught in a loop, a sickening cycle that repeated itself over and over again. The echoes, the voices, the figures that watched him, they were all part of something much bigger. Something that wasn't just part of the forest, but part of him. He had started out as a ranger, a man seeking answers in the wilderness. But now he was something else. Something far less human. He couldn't remember how long he had been here anymore. Time had stretched, distorted, like a rubber band being pulled too far. The memories of his past, his life before the forest, had begun to fade, like old photographs left out in the sun. His name, Tyler Mitchell, felt distant, foreign, as if it belonged to someone else. His identity, once clear and sharp, was now a fog that he could no longer pierce. It was like everything around him was being watched. But not by the usual predators, not by wolves or bears. No, the watchers here were older. They were ancient and had been watching him for far longer than he could comprehend. The creatures, the voices, the figures that mimicked him, they were all experiments. He was an experiment. He had always been one. Tyler's heart thudded in his chest, the realization making his blood run cold. The forest had been manipulating him. His every move, every decision, had been guided, not by instinct, but by forces that were far beyond his understanding. He had thought he was searching for the truth, but the truth had been stalking him all along, a silent predator, waiting for him to discover the cruel, insidious reality of his existence. He wasn't the first. He wasn't even close. This was their game. And it was a game he had no chance of winning. Tyler stumbled forward, his legs weak beneath him as the weight of it all settled on his shoulders. He felt a tug, a pull, something deep inside him, a memory or perhaps a shadow of one. His instincts screamed at him to run, to break free from the oppressive grip of the forest, but his feet refused to move. The trees seemed to close in tighter with every breath he took. The shadows twisted and danced, mocking him. And then he saw it. There, in the distance, standing amidst the swirling fog, was the familiar figure, the one that had been following him from the very beginning. It was him. Or rather, it looked like him. The figure stood tall, its eyes locked onto his, its face distorted, stretched unnaturally. Tyler took a step forward, but his body refused to obey. His mind screamed at him to run, but the figure remained rooted in place, its smile, a cold, knowing smile, never faltering. "You know what you are, don't you?" the figure asked, its voice like the rasping of leaves in the wind. Tyler opened his mouth, but no words came out. His mind was clouded, fractured, and the weight of everything was too much to bear. His past life, his mission, his very existence, it had all been manipulated. He was a part of their experiment. A mere plaything in a much darker design. "You've been here before," the figure whispered, stepping closer. "And you'll be here again. It always happens like this. The loop is infinite, Tyler. You are the experiment. You are the answer they're seeking." Tyler's breath caught in his throat. The loop. The words echoed in his mind, the truth cutting through the fog like a knife. The figure's hand reached out, and Tyler's world shifted violently. The air around him seemed to warp, to bend and stretch in impossible directions. Time fractured, and the clearing around him disappeared, replaced by something far darker, far more alien. He was no longer in the forest. He was no longer in the world he had known. He was nowhere. Tyler felt his body twist, his consciousness splitting in two, as if something had taken a hold of him, tearing at the very core of his being. His memories, his true memories, were being ripped apart. The life he had lived, the people he had known, all of it was being replaced by something else. Something that had no place in reality. He was an echo. A distorted shadow of a man who had once existed in a world that was no longer his. Tyler screamed until his voice was lost in the endless expanse of darkness. He reached out, but his hands passed through nothing, grasping at air. The figure was gone, and the forest had vanished, replaced by something far worse. The boundaries of reality had dissolved entirely, and there was no escape. There never would be. In that moment, Tyler understood the terrible truth. The forest was not just a place. It was a construct. A prison. And he, along with everyone before him, was part of a never-ending experiment. An experiment designed to study how the human mind cracked under pressure, how it fractured in isolation, and how it could be manipulated, broken, and reborn again. And again. And again. Tyler was the subject, but more than that, he was the keeper of the loop. He had always been. And every cycle, every repetition, was simply another iteration of his endless torment. The creatures in the forest, the whispers in the dark, they were the architects of his suffering. They were the ones who pulled the strings, watching as he spiraled, forever trying to escape, only to return to the same place over and over. He wasn't the first. He wasn't the last. Tyler's mind shattered under the weight of it all, the realization sending him tumbling into darkness, his soul fractured and scattered. He was part of the cycle. And in that moment he knew, the cycle would never end. It was never meant to. And neither was